The string of pearls my grandmother left me hit the marble floor of the country club ballroom and scattered like teeth, and my brother-in-law stood over them grinning while 200 people pretended to study their salad forks. I want to back up, because if I just start there, you'll think I'm the unstable one, and that's exactly what they spent 30 years training people to believe. My name doesn't matter as much as the shape of the thing. I'm the older daughter. I was the one who got the chores and the curfews and the lectures about responsibility, and my younger sister got the soft landing every single time. When she totaled the car at 19, our father said teenagers make mistakes. When I came home 15 minutes late at 17, he sat at the kitchen table with the lights off like a detective in a movie, waiting to interrogate me. I learned early that there were two sets of rules in our house, and I was only ever going to live under the strict one. People who didn't grow up like that always ask the same thing. Why didn't you just leave? And the honest answer is that when you're raised inside a system, you don't see it as a system. You see it as the weather. You don't question why it rains. You just bring a coat and tell yourself everybody gets wet. So I brought my coat for 30 years. I paid for my sister's first apartment because our parents asked me to, and I had a good job, and she was, in their words, still finding herself. I co-signed a car loan for her when she was 26. I covered the deposit on the salon she opened and then closed 8 months later. Every time, our mother would call me, and her voice would go thin and tender, and she'd say that family takes care of family, and that I was so strong, so capable, that I didn't need things the way my sister did. She made my competence into a reason to give me less. She made my sister's chaos into a reason to give her more, and I let her, because the alternative was being the cold one, the selfish one, the daughter who had everything and still wouldn't share. I should tell you about the man, because he's the part everyone gets stuck on later. I met him at a charity thing for the hospital where I worked in administration. He was a contractor, the kind who shows up to a black tie event in a suit that fits a little too well, like he rented confidence along with it. He was charming in the way that men who've never been told no are charming. I was 33 and tired of being the responsible one in every room I walked into, and he made being reckless feel like being chosen. We dated for a year. He proposed on a beach in a way that looked exactly like the proposals you see online, and I said yes, because I wanted the life that came after the yes more than I wanted the man, and that's a thing I can only admit now. My sister met him at our engagement dinner. I remember her face when he walked in. I remember thinking she looked hungry and then telling myself I was being unkind. I wasn't being unkind. I was being observant, and I'd just been trained my whole life to apologize for it. Here's the part I have never told anyone in full. 4 months before the wedding, I found the texts, not because I was snooping, because his phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and the preview showed a message from a contact saved under a man's name, and the message said something a coworker doesn't say. I opened it. I know you're not supposed to open it. I opened it anyway, and the contact was him, my sister, hiding behind a fake name in his phone, and the conversation went back almost to the engagement dinner. The hungry look. The thing I'd told myself I imagined. I want to tell you I screamed. I want to tell you I threw the ring in his face. What I actually did was put the phone back down exactly where I'd found it, angle and all. And I went and sat on the edge of the bathtub and listened to the water run, and somewhere in the steam and the sound of it, something in me went very quiet and very clear. Because here's what I understood in that moment, sitting on the cold porcelain. If I confronted him, he would deny it, and my parents would side with my sister, because they always sided with my sister, and the story they'd tell would be that I was paranoid and jealous and trying to ruin her life. If I confronted her, she would cry, and our mother would hold her, and I would once again be the villain for making my baby sister cry. I had 30 years of evidence telling me exactly how that movie ended. I'd seen it 100 times. I knew every line. So I didn't confront anyone. I went to a lawyer instead. Not a divorce lawyer. There was no marriage yet. I went to a different kind of lawyer. The boring kind. The kind who deals with money and signatures and the small print nobody reads. Because over those 30 years of being the capable one, I had become the load-bearing wall of my entire family, and load-bearing walls have a strange amount of power if they ever decide to stop bearing the load. I want to be precise about what I held, so you understand this wasn't fantasy. I was a co-signer on my sister's current apartment lease, the nice one downtown. She could not have qualified for a loan. I was the guarantor on a personal loan she'd taken to fund her latest venture, a wellness brand that existed mostly as an unprofitable website and a closet full of unsold leggings. My name is on a credit account our mother used for what she called household emergencies, which in practice meant my sister's emergencies. And, the detail that mattered most, I had quietly become the largest single contributor to a family trust our father had set up years ago, the one he liked to talk about at holidays as his legacy, the one my sister was set to draw from for what our parents called her education, which had been ongoing and degree-free for the better part of a decade. I had been funding the machine that was built to humiliate me. I'd been paying for the privilege. So in those 4 months, I did what no one expected the capable daughter to do, which was to use the capability for myself for once. I met with the lawyer. I met with my financial advisor. I moved deliberately and silently. I restructured. I removed my name where I could remove it cleanly and gave proper legal notice where I had to. I did not freeze anything in anger. I did it the way you diffuse something, slow and careful, because I knew that the second they realized the floor was moving, they would all turn on me at once, and I wanted to be standing on solid ground when they did. And I let the wedding go forward. I know. I know that's the part that makes people want to grab me by the shoulders. Why marry him? I didn't, not really, and I'll get to that. But I let the day arrive because the day was the stage. And I had decided that if I was going to be humiliated, it would be on my terms, with the lights I chose, in front of the audience I selected. The morning of, my sister was a bridesmaid. She wore a dress the color of champagne, which I'd let her pick, which I now think she chose on purpose. She hugged me before the ceremony and told me she was so happy for me, and I hugged her back and felt absolutely nothing, which after 30 years of feeling too much was its own kind of peace. The ceremony itself I'll keep brief, because it's the only part I can't fully look at even now. I stood at the front of a room full of people who loved a version of me that didn't exist, and I said words I didn't mean to a man I no longer wanted, and I watched my sister watch him over my shoulder, and I held it. I held all of it. The officiant pronounced us, and we hadn't actually signed anything official yet. The license was sitting unsigned in a folder in the bridal suite, and I was the only person in the building who knew that detail was about to matter enormously. The reception is where it happened. We were maybe 40 minutes in. The toasts had been given. My father had stood and talked about raising 2 beautiful daughters and somehow made even that about my sister, telling a long story about her as a little girl while I sat there in my own wedding dress like a guest at someone else's party. People laughed. I clapped. I'd gotten very good at clapping. And then my sister, who had been drinking since the ceremony, stood up. I think she expected a moment. I think she'd been building toward it all day, all week maybe, the pressure of the secret and the resentment and whatever story she'd told herself about deserving him more than I did. She raised her glass and she didn't propose a toast. She threw it. The champagne arced across the table and hit me across the chest and face. Cold and sharp-smelling, and before anyone could even gasp, she reached across and shoved the corner of the cake table, and the whole tiered thing tilted and came down in a slow, ugly collapse. And she stood there in her champagne dress with her chest heaving, and she screamed at me. She said, "This is what you get for acting like you're better than everyone." She said, "You think you're so perfect." She said he wanted me first. You know that. He wanted me the whole time, and you're too cold to even keep a man interested. That's why he came to me. The room went so silent I could hear the cake sliding off the table. And my mother, God, my mother got up out of her chair and she did not come to me, did not look at me, dripping and shaking in my ruined dress. She crossed the floor and she wrapped my sister up in her arms and she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, that my sister just needed to let it out, that she'd been holding so much in, that everyone should give her space. She comforted the woman who just confessed to sleeping with my fiancé at my wedding, in front of everyone I knew. I want you to understand that I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying 4 months earlier on the edge of a bathtub. What I felt instead, standing there with grandmother's pearls broken on the floor where they'd snapped when I flinched, was the cleanest feeling I have ever felt in my life. Like the last thread holding me to all of them had finally been cut, and I was simply free. I picked up what pearls I could. I didn't say a word. I walked out of that ballroom with champagne in my hair and 200 witnesses watching the cold daughter finally crack, and I drove myself home, and I slept better than I had in a year. The phone calls started at 7:30 the next morning. The first was my sister, and she wasn't crying anymore. She was screaming. The leasing office had sent her a notice because the day before the wedding, on schedule, the guarantor change I'd filed had gone through, and she'd just learned that without my name on her lease, she did not qualify to stay. And the landlord wanted either a new qualified guarantor or her out by the end of the month. She wanted to know what I had done. She wanted to know how I could be so cruel to family. The second call, 15 minutes later, was the bank. Except it wasn't really, for me, it was my mother on the line in the conference call. She'd forced because the household credit account she relied on had been closed, cleanly, with notice she'd ignored. And the card had declined that morning at the very pharmacy where she'd gone to fill a prescription, and she was humiliated. And humiliating was the one thing my mother could not survive doing to herself. The third call was my father, and his voice wasn't thin and tender like my mother's. His voice was small, because his advisor had called him about the trust, the legacy, and learned that its single largest funding source had quietly and legally withdrawn future contributions, and that the projected payout my sister had been counting on for her ongoing education was now a fraction of what everyone assumed. And my father, who had spent my whole life talking about that trust, like a monument to his own generosity, had just discovered that the monument had mostly been built with my money, and the bricks were leaving. They didn't understand on that first morning that the thing they were really mourning wasn't the money. It was the discovery that the cold, capable daughter they'd spent 30 years taking from had been the foundation under all of it, and the foundation had just walked out from under the house. My sister came to my apartment that afternoon. She'd sobered up. She stood in my doorway with mascara tracks, and she said the thing I'd waited my entire life to hear, which was an apology. Except it wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. She said she was sorry, and in the same breath, she asked me to put my name back on the lease because she had nowhere to go. And I looked at my little sister, who I had loved my whole life in the helpless way you love family even when they're hurting you, and I told her the truth. I told her I'd seen the texts in March. I watched it land. I watched her understand that I'd known for 4 months, that I'd stood at that altar knowing that every hug and every kind word from her had landed on a woman who already knew exactly what she was, and then I told her the part that took the floor out from under her entirely. I told her we weren't married, that the license sat unsigned because I'd never had any intention of signing it, that as far as the state was concerned, there had been a party and a ruined cake and nothing legally binding at all, that I had let her have her scene, let her scream her confession to 200 people, and she'd burned every bridge she had in that room for a marriage that did not exist. She'd humiliated me to take a husband from me. There was no husband. There was just a man I'd already decided to leave, who'd thought he was getting a wife and a wedding, and who had instead gotten publicly named as a cheater by his own mistress in front of everyone he wanted to impress. I closed the door. The fallout took months, and I won't pretend it was clean. My mother sent letters, my father left voicemails that started angry and ended pleading. My sister lost the apartment and moved into a smaller one and, last I heard, finally took a job with a schedule and a boss, the first real one of her adult life. The man disappeared the way men like that do when there's nothing left to gain, off to charm some other tired woman in some other rented suit. People in my life who heard pieces of this asked if I felt guilty. They asked it gently, the way you ask someone if they've considered they might be the problem. And for a while, I performed the right answer, the soft one, the one where I said it was complicated, and family is family, and I hoped we'd all heal. But I'll tell you what I actually feel, alone, when no one's asking me to be the reasonable one. I feel like a woman who carried a house on her back for 30 years and was told the whole time that her spine was a gift she owed everyone. I feel like I didn't take revenge so much as I simply stopped paying for a privilege I'd never wanted. The privilege of being the one who could be hurt without consequence. They built a whole family on the assumption that I would always absorb the cost, and I just stopped absorbing it and watched what they'd really built come down. I kept the pearls. I had them restrung. They're shorter now, because some of the ones that rolled under the tables that night were never found, and I like them better that way. Smaller. Mine. I think about that morning sometimes. The 3 phone calls in a row, the dominoes I'd set up months before falling, exactly where I placed them. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the money or the man or even my sister's face in the doorway. It's the quiet. The quiet I felt on the edge of that bathtub the night I found out, when I stopped being the daughter they'd made me and became someone who simply decided to stop. They thought the cruelty was the broken cake and the champagne and the screaming. They thought she'd won something that day. They never understood that the real news came at 7:30 the next morning, and by then, the woman they'd spent 3 decades underestimating had already quietly walked out and taken the floor with her. I used to think the cruelest thing my family did was the champagne and the cake and the screaming. I was wrong. The cruelest thing was 30 years of teaching me that my strength was something I owed them, and that my pain was the one thing in the house that didn't count. Everything that happened at that reception was just the last bill coming due, and I had finally decided not to pay it. People want a villain in a story like this, and they want it to be my sister. But she didn't fall out of the sky. She became what she became because every time she broke something, someone handed her my care to fix it. My parents thought they were loving her. They were starving her, the way you starve a person when you never let them feel the weight of a single choice. And they thought they were honoring me by calling me capable, when really they were just making sure the capable one never asked for anything back. Cause and effect is patient. You can defer it for decades. You cannot cancel it. If there's anything I'd want my younger self to understand, sitting on the edge of that bathtub with the water running, it's that being good is not the same as being silent. For years, I confused the two. I thought the right thing was to keep absorbing, keep smoothing over, keep being the wall everyone leaned on, because that was what a decent daughter did. But there is no decency in helping people stay cruel. Real character isn't how much you can take. Sometimes it's knowing exactly when to stop letting yourself be taken from. And I had to learn the difference between reacting and thinking. The version of me from 10 years ago would have thrown the ring, screamed back, given them the loud breakdown they were already writing the script for. The version of me on that bathtub edge got quiet instead and went to a lawyer and read the fine print and moved one careful piece at a time. Clear thinking is a kind of mercy you give your future self. It's the difference between a wound and a way out. The last thing, the hardest thing, was the staying power it took to wait 4 months while pretending nothing had changed. To hug the woman who'd betrayed me and feel the betrayal and hold it anyway because I'd chosen a longer game than my anger wanted. That patience wasn't coldness, no matter what they screamed across that ballroom. It was the steadiest thing I have ever done. I kept the pearls and had them restrung shorter, and now when I fasten them, I think the same thing every time. They didn't lose me on my wedding day. They lost me the moment I understood that I was allowed to be the one who walked away whole.